They called it the Gauntlet of Zortak. For 3,000 years, the Galactic Council had used it as the ultimate punishment, feeding their worst criminals to the ancient dragon that ruled the forbidden moon of Kethmarai. No creature had ever survived. No being had ever returned. But they had never thrown a human child into its depths. When 13-year-old Maya Chen was cast down into the dragon's lair, her legs useless from birth, her body broken by their alien tortures, the council expected screams. They expected death. They expected another tale to whisper about the monster that devoured worlds. Instead, they witnessed something that would shatter their understanding of humanity forever, because sometimes the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy isn't the one with the sharpest claws or the strongest bite. Sometimes it's the one with the biggest heart. This is the story of how a disabled human girl became the most feared name in galactic history, not through violence, but through something far more powerful, something the alien races had forgotten existed: compassion. Descended through the toxic atmosphere of Kethmarai. Each violent shake sent lightning bolts of pain through her twisted spine, but she bit down on her screams. She wouldn't give the Galactic Council guards the satisfaction. "Look at this pathetic thing," sneered Vextar, the lead Zephyrian guard, his 6 arms gesturing dismissively at Maya's wheelchair-bound form. His translator rendered his words in perfect English, though the contempt needed no translation. "The humans sent us a broken toy as their representative?" Maya's dark eyes flicked up to meet his yellow gaze. At 13, she had learned to hide her intelligence behind a mask of apparent weakness. The alien races always underestimated humans, but they especially underestimated human children, and they completely dismissed disabled ones. It was a mistake that had served her well during the 3 months of captivity and interrogation that had led to this moment. The human colony on Kepler 442b violated 17 interstellar treaties, announced Supreme Chancellor Throckdan through the ship's communication system. His voice carried the weight of 1,000 conquered worlds. "Their punishment is decided by ancient law. One representative shall face the trial of Zorthak. Should they survive, their people go free. When they fail, as all others have failed, humanity will be erased from the galaxy." Maya knew the truth behind their so-called violations. The human colony had discovered something in the ruins of an ancient civilization, technology that could revolutionize faster-than-light travel. The Galactic Council couldn't allow an upstart species like humanity to gain such an advantage. The treaty violations were fabricated excuses for what amounted to a death sentence. The transport ship's engines whined as they broke through the final layer of clouds. Through the reinforced viewport, Maya caught her first glimpse of the Gauntlet of Zorthak. The structure rose from the moon-scarred surface like a twisted metal mountain, its walls pulsing with an eerie bioluminescent glow. At its peak, barely visible through the swirling mists, lay the entrance to the dragon's domain. 3,000 years, whispered Jeklon, a younger Aquarian guard whose tentacles writhed nervously. 3,000 years since the last creature was thrown into the gauntlet. None have ever returned, because none were worthy of survival, Vextar replied coldly. The dragon Morgoth judges all who enter. It can sense fear, desperation, violence. It feeds on negative emotions and destroys those who carry them. Maya absorbed this information silently. During her captivity, she had learned much about the legendary dragon from overheard conversations and stolen data files. Morgoth was older than recorded galactic history, a creature of immense psychic power that had once been revered as a god by primitive civilizations. The Council had imprisoned it here after a great war, using it as their ultimate executioner. But Maya had noticed something in the ancient texts that others had missed. The dragon didn't simply kill, it judged, and judgment implied the possibility of mercy. The ship settled onto the landing platform with a bone-jarring thud. Through the walls, Maya could hear the mechanical sounds of docking clamps engaging and atmospheric processors cycling. Her hands gripped the wheels of her chair, knuckles white with tension she couldn't quite hide. The airlock hissed open, and the guards roughly pushed her chair forward. The wheels bumped and scraped against the metal grating as they moved through a series of stark corridors filled with monitoring equipment and automated weapon systems. Everything was designed to ensure that those who entered the gauntlet never left. They emerged onto a circular platform suspended high above the moon's surface. The air tasted of ozone and decay, and Maya could feel the weight of countless watching eyes. Representatives from dozens of alien species filled the observation galleries that ringed the platform. They had come to witness humanity's final judgment. "Citizens of the galaxy," Supreme Chancellor Throckton's voice boomed across the assembled crowd. The massive Droctarian stood nearly 4 meters tall, his crystalline exoskeleton refracting the platform's harsh lights into prismatic patterns. "Today we execute the ancient law. The human species has chosen their champion." A wave of derisive laughter rippled through the galleries. Maya could hear their whispered comments through her universal translator. A broken child. Typical human weakness. This will be over quickly. She forced herself to remain calm, drawing on techniques learned during years of medical procedures and physical therapy. Pain had been her constant companion since birth, when a genetic disorder had left her legs useless and her spine twisted. But pain had also been her teacher, showing her that strength came in forms the strong could never understand. "The trial begins now," Throckdan announced. "Should the humans survive until the rising of Kethmari's star, their species will be granted clemency. When they fail, as written in the stars, humanity shall be cleansed from existence." The platform beneath Maya's chair suddenly tilted, becoming a steep ramp leading down into the heart of the gauntlet. She had no choice but to let gravity pull her forward, her chair picking up speed as she descended into the darkness below. The walls around her seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat, and she realized they weren't entirely mechanical. Bioorganic conduits ran alongside metal frameworks, creating a hybrid structure that felt disturbingly alive. Bioluminescent patches provided just enough light to see the path ahead, which twisted and branched like the interior of some vast creature. As she rolled deeper into the structure, Maya began to sense something else, a presence vast and ancient. The dragon's consciousness pressed against the edges of her mind like a gentle tide, not invading but simply observing. Most beings who entered the gauntlet came filled with rage, fear, or desperate hope. They brought weapons and armor, strategies and prayers. But Maya brought something different, something that had sustained her through years of pain and prejudice. Acceptance. She accepted her limitations without letting them define her limits. She accepted the cruelty of others without becoming cruel herself. And she accepted this moment, this trial, without the desperate need for any particular outcome. The path leveled out, and Maya found herself in a vast circular chamber lit by pillars of blue flame that never seemed to consume their fuel. The walls rose beyond sight, disappearing to shadows that seemed to move with their own intelligence. And there, coiled in the chamber's center like a living mountain, was Morgoth. The dragon was beautiful in a way that transcended simple aesthetics. Its scales shifted between deep purples and midnight blues, each one inscribed with patterns that seemed to contain entire star charts. Its eyes were twin galaxies, swirling with cosmic fire and infinite depth. When it moved, reality seemed to bend slightly around its presence. Maya stopped her chair at the chamber's edge and simply waited. She made no aggressive moves, spoke no words of challenge or plea. She simply existed in the dragon's presence, her mind open and unguarded. Morgoth's great head lowered until its eyes were level with hers, each pupil larger than her entire body. When it spoke, its voice resonated not through the air, but directly into her consciousness. "Another comes to face judgment," the dragon observed, its mental voice carrying harmonics of starlight and time. "But this one is different." Maya nodded slowly. "I'm probably not what you were expecting. Indeed, where others bring fear, you bring peace. Where others carry weapons, you carry only yourself. Where others seek to prove their worth through violence, you seem content simply to be. Teddy. The dragon's head tilted, studying her with ancient curiosity. Why do you not tremble? Do you not know what I am? You're Morgeth, Maya replied, simply. You've been alone here for a very long time. That must be hard. For the first time in 3 millennia, the dragon was surprised, not by aggression or cowardice, not by cleverness or strength, but by compassion directed toward itself. The emotion was so unexpected that it took a moment to recognize it. You, me? There was no anger in the question, only wonder, not pity, Maya corrected gently. Understanding. I know what it's like to be judged by others for what you are instead of who you are. I know what it's like to have people fear you before they even try to know you. The dragon's consciousness recoiled slightly, not in rejection but in surprise at being seen so clearly. For 3,000 years, creatures had entered this chamber focused entirely on their own survival, their own needs, their own fears. None had ever considered the dragon's experience. The council imprisoned me here, Morgeth said slowly, because they feared my power. They transformed me from a being who once helped civilizations grow into a weapon for their own purposes. Teddy. That wasn't your choice, Maya observed. No. It was not. The dragon's eyes dimmed with something that might have been sadness. I have judged thousands of beings over the centuries. Warriors and criminals, heroes and villains, all sought to prove themselves worthy through strength or cunning or desperate courage. All failed because they could not see past their own needs. Maya nodded understanding. They tried to take something from you instead of offering something to you. Precisely. The dragon's massive form shifted, scales catching the blue firelight. Tell me, small one, what do you offer? What do you seek to take? Maya was quiet for a long moment, considering the question carefully. I don't have anything to offer except myself. And I'm not here to take anything. I'm here because my people need me to be here. Whether I live or die doesn't matter as much as trying to understand why this is happening. Your people chose you because they saw you as expendable, Morgeth stated matter-of-factly. A broken child with no future, easily sacrificed for the possibility of mercy. Maya's jaw tightened slightly, the first sign of emotion she had shown. Maybe some of them thought that. But others chose me because they knew I wouldn't try to fight you or trick you or prove I was something I'm not. They chose me because they thought I might be able to see you clearly. And what do you see? Maya looked into those cosmic eyes and spoke the truth that had been growing in her heart since the moment she entered the chamber. I see someone who remembers what it was like to care about others, someone who became a weapon but never stopped being a being with feelings and thoughts and loneliness. I see someone who has been forced to judge others for crimes they didn't commit and punishments they didn't deserve. The chamber fell silent, except for the crackling of the eternal flames. Morgeth's great head rose, and for a moment Maya wondered if she had gone too far, if her honesty had offended rather than connected. But when the dragon spoke again, its voice carried a warmth that had been absent before. You see truly, young human, more truly than any who have come before. But sight alone does not determine worthiness. The trial is not merely to observe, it is to choose. What choice? Maya asked. The dragon's form began to glow with inner light, and the chamber around them shifted and changed. The walls became transparent, showing the vast cosmos beyond, stars being born and dying, galaxies spinning in their eternal dance, worlds teeming with life and love and loss. The choice every being must make, Morgeth replied. When faced with power over others, what will you do? When given the ability to judge and condemn, will you choose justice or mercy? When offered the chance to be the weapon or the shield, which will you become? The chamber continued to transform around them, and Maya realized that this was not just a trial of survival. It was a test of character that would determine not only her fate. The chamber continued its transformation, reality bending and flowing like liquid starlight around Maya and the ancient dragon. She found herself no longer in a simple stone room, but suspended in what seemed to be the heart of the cosmos itself. Galaxies wheeled slowly overhead, their spiral arms trailing streams of newborn stars, while beneath them the histories of 1,000 civilizations played out in shimmering holographic detail. "This is the true trial," Morgoth explained, his massive form now seeming to exist partially in multiple dimensions at once. "Every being who enters this place must face the same choice that I faced long ago. They must decide what they would do with ultimate power." Maya watched in fascination as the cosmic display shifted to show scenes from the dragon's own past. She saw Morgoth as he had been eons ago, younger, smaller, but still magnificent, working alongside various alien civilizations to help them advance and grow. His psychic abilities had been used to heal minds shattered by war, to facilitate communication between species who couldn't otherwise understand each other, to guide the development of technologies that could benefit entire worlds. "You were like a teacher," Maya observed softly, "a helper." "Indeed, I believe that power should be used to nurture and protect," but the Galactic Council saw my abilities differently. The scenes shifted, showing the rise of the current council structure. Maya saw how they had gradually corrupted Morgoth's role, pushing him to use his powers for judgment rather than healing, for punishment rather than growth. They didn't want a teacher, Maya realized. They wanted an executioner. At first I resisted. I tried to find mercy even in judgment, to offer redemption rather than destruction. But they brought me beings truly worthy of punishment, tyrants who had committed genocide, psychopaths who tortured entire worlds for pleasure. Gradually, I convinced myself that some beings deserved to die. The cosmic display showed the slow corruption of the dragon's purpose. Maya could see how each justified execution had made the next easier, how the council had gradually brought him beings whose crimes were less clear, whose situations more complex. By the time Morgoth realized what was happening, he had become exactly what they wanted, a weapon of absolute judgment with no room for mercy. "And they imprisoned you here when you finally understood what they'd done," Maya said. "Yes. When I refused to continue, they trapped me in this place and made my imprisonment itself into a weapon. Now every being who faces me must confront the same choice, become a judge who decides who lives and dies, or remain powerless to protect those they care about." Maya looked around at the swirling cosmos, beginning to understand the nature of the trial. "Show me," she said quietly. The space around them shifted again, and suddenly Maya was looking down at her own people. She could see the human colony on Kepler 442b, the families and children who were counting on her success. She could see her own parents, who had believed in her when no one else would, who had taught her that disability was not inability, that limitations could become sources of unique strength. But she could also see the Galactic Council's fleet, waiting in orbit around the colony world. Thousands of ships armed with planet-killing weapons ready to sterilize every trace of human life if she failed this trial. "The power is yours to claim," Morgoth said, and Maya felt something vast and cosmic pressing against her consciousness. "You could take my abilities, become the judge of all who enter this place. You could decide who lives and who dies. You could save your people and condemn their enemies." Maya felt the psychic power flowing around her like a river of liquid starlight. She could sense its potential, the ability to peer into the depths of any being's soul, to judge their worthiness, to grant life or death with a thought. It was intoxicating in its scope, terrifying in its implications. "But if I take it," she said slowly, "I become what you became, another weapon for the Council to use." "Not necessarily. You could use it differently. You could judge fairly, show mercy where I showed none. You could protect the innocent and punish only the truly guilty." Maya was quiet for a long time, watching the cosmic display show her the consequences of various choices. She saw timelines where she accepted the power and used it wisely, becoming a force for justice in the galaxy. She saw others where the power gradually corrupted her, as it had corrupted Morgeth himself. She saw possibilities where she refused the power and watched her people die, and others where her refusal somehow led to unexpected outcomes. "Everyone who has come before me has faced this same choice?" she asked. "In various forms, yes. Some were offered the power to save their homeworlds. Others were promised the ability to right great wrongs or protect their loved ones. All ultimately faced the question of whether they would become a judge of others, and they all chose to take the power without exception, even knowing the price, even understanding the consequences. They all believed they would be different. They all believed they could handle such responsibility without being corrupted by it." Maya nodded slowly, understanding flooding through her. "But that's not really the choice, is it?" Morgeth's cosmic eyes focused on her with sudden intensity. "Explain." "The real choice isn't whether to take power over others. It's whether to accept that some problems can't be solved by having power over others. The real choice is whether to trust in something other than domination and control." The dragon was silent for a long moment, his ancient consciousness turning over her words. "And what would you trust instead?" Maya looked again at the display showing her people, not just the humans on Kepler, 442b, but the various alien species throughout the galaxy who had suffered under the Council's rule. She saw the Zephyrians whose homeworld had been strip-mined for resources, the Aquarians whose water worlds had been poisoned by industrial waste, the countless smaller species who had been enslaved or exterminated in the name of galactic order. "I'd trust in the idea that beings can change," she said finally. "That they can grow and learn and become better than they were. Even the council members, they weren't born evil. They became what they are through fear and the corruption of power. If they can become worse, maybe they can also become better." "A naive hope," Morgeth observed, but there was no condemnation in his voice. "Maybe. But it's the only hope that doesn't require me to become a monster myself." Maya turned to face the dragon directly. "You said you remembered what it was like to care about others. If you could go back to being that being, the teacher, the helper, would you?" The dragon's form flickered, and for a moment Maya saw him as he had been in the ancient past. Smaller, yes, but somehow more real, more present. "I do not know if such a thing is possible. Too much has happened. Too much pain has been caused." "Pain can be healed," Maya said with the certainty of someone who had lived with it every day of her life. "It doesn't disappear, but it can stop controlling you. It can even become a source of compassion for others who are hurting." The cosmic display around them began to shift again, showing new possibilities. Maya saw timelines where she and Morgeth worked together not as judge and executioner, but as healers trying to repair the damage the Council had done. She saw the dragon's psychic abilities being used to facilitate understanding between species, to help traumatized beings heal from the wounds of war and oppression. "You would refuse the power?" Morgeth asked. "I would choose a different kind of power," Maya replied. "The power to heal instead of harm, to connect instead of condemn, to trust instead of control." "And if your choice leads to your people's destruction? If the Council kills them all because you were not strong enough to stop them?" Maya felt tears forming in her eyes, but her voice remained steady. "Then at least they'll die knowing that someone chose love over fear, mercy over judgment. Maybe that will matter to someone, somewhere. Maybe it will inspire others to make better choices." The dragon studied her for what felt like hours, his cosmic consciousness probing the depths of her sincerity. Maya felt him examining not just her words, but her heart, her memories, her deepest beliefs about what it meant to be human. Finally, Morgeth spoke. 3,000 years I have waited for someone to make a different choice. 3,000 years of beings who believed they could wield ultimate power without being corrupted by it. You are the first to understand that the only way to win is not to play the game. Does that mean I passed the trial?" "It means," Morgoth said, his form beginning to glow with a warm golden light, "that you have given me something I had not felt in millennia. Not hope for justice or vengeance, but hope for redemption. Hope that change is possible, even for one such as me." The chamber around them continued to transform, but now Maya could sense something different in the air. Where before there had been the weight of ancient judgment and cosmic justice, now there was something lighter, more alive. It felt like the moment when winter finally breaks and the first green shoots push through the snow. "What happens now?" Maya asked. "Now we discover whether your faith in the possibility of change is justified. The Council expects you to emerge from this place either dead or transformed into their next weapon. They are about to learn that there are more than two possible outcomes." Morgoth's massive form began to move, uncoiling from his resting place for the first time in centuries. As he rose to his full height, the chamber around them expanded to accommodate him, reality bending and stretching like elastic. "Come, young healer," the dragon said, and Maya felt herself and her chair being lifted gently by psychic force. "Let us go show the galaxy what it looks like when power chooses to serve love instead of fear." As they began to ascend toward the surface of the gauntlet, Maya realized that she had indeed been transformed by the trial, not into a weapon or a judge, but into something far more dangerous to the established order. She had become someone who could inspire others to believe that change was possible, that the cycle of violence and domination could be broken. And she was no longer alone in that belief. The dragon Morgoth, judge of worlds and executioner of civilizations, had chosen to become something new. Together they rose toward a confrontation that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization, not through violence or conquest, but through the simple revolutionary act of choosing compassion over control. The real trial was just beginning. The ascent through the gauntlet's twisted passages was unlike anything Maya could have imagined. Where the journey down had been a lonely descent into judgment, the return was something entirely different. Morgoth's massive form seemed to flow through the biomechanical corridors like liquid starlight, his scales now glowing with the warm golden light of transformation. Maya, still seated in her wheelchair but lifted by the dragon's gentle psychic embrace, felt as though she was traveling through the bloodstream of some vast awakening giant. "Can you feel it?" Morgoth asked, his mental voice now carrying harmonics of wonder rather than the weight of cosmic loneliness. "The structure itself is changing." Maya could indeed feel it. The gauntlet had been built. As a prison, its very architecture designed to contain and channel the dragon's power for the Council's purposes. But as Morgoth's consciousness shifted from judgment to healing, the entire structure was responding. Bioluminescent veins that had once pulsed with harsh, cold light now glowed with warmth. Metal corridors seemed to soften and curve, becoming more organic, more alive. The builders never considered this possibility, Maya realized. They designed it to contain a weapon, not to adapt to a healer. Indeed, the prison becomes a chrysalis. How fitting! The dragon's amusement rippled through the psychic connection they shared, though I suspect the Council will be less pleased with the metaphor. As they rose, Maya became aware of other presences in the structure. Through Morgoth's enhanced senses, she could perceive the monitoring systems that the Council had placed throughout the gauntlet. Sensors designed to track and record the dragon's activities to ensure that his power remained properly contained and directed. "They're watching us," she said. "They have always watched. But now, for the first time in 3 millennia, they will see something that their protocols never prepared them for." Morgoth's consciousness touched the monitoring systems, not to destroy them, but to understand them. Fascinating. They have been recording not just my actions, but my emotional states, my psychic fluctuations. They have been studying the process of how power corrupts consciousness. Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the gauntlet's atmosphere. "They've been experimenting on you. All these years, all those trials, they weren't just executions. They were data collection. Yes. Each being who faced me provided them with another data point in their research into the weaponization of psychic power. They have been trying to understand how to create more beings like me, how to corrupt others in the same way I was corrupted. The implications were staggering. Maya realized that her own trial had been intended as much more than a simple execution. The Council had been studying humanity, had identified their capacity for both compassion and violence, and had been planning to use the trial to gather data on how to corrupt human psychic potential. But you didn't corrupt, Morgith observed with satisfaction. Instead, you helped me to heal. Their experiment has produced the opposite of what they intended. They emerged from the inner passages into the larger chambers where the Gauntlet's support systems hummed and whirred. Here Maya could see the full scope of what the Council had built. It wasn't just a prison, it was a laboratory, a factory designed to study and replicate the process of turning benevolent beings into weapons of judgment. How many others? Maya asked quietly. I do not know, but I can sense them. Other consciousnesses imprisoned in similar structures throughout the galaxy. Beings who once sought to help and heal, now trapped in cycles of judgment and execution. Morgeth's anger was a controlled flame, warming rather than burning. We are not the only ones who need liberation. As they approached the surface levels of the Gauntlet, Maya could hear the sounds of commotion from above. Voices shouting in various alien languages, the heavy footsteps of armed guards, the whine of weapons being powered up. The Council had not expected their prize weapon to emerge from the trial chamber, accompanied by a living human. They're afraid, Maya realized. Good. Fear will make them careless, prone to mistakes that reveal their true nature to the watching galaxy. Morgith's form began to shift as they neared the surface, his massive draconic shape compacting and solidifying until he appeared as he had in the ancient records, still enormous, still magnificent, but somehow more real, more present in the physical world. The final door of the Gauntlet burst open, and they emerged onto the observation platform where Maya's trial had begun. The assembled representatives of the Galactic Council's member species were in complete chaos. Some were shouting demands for explanations, others were backing away in terror, and still others were frantically operating recording equipment to capture whatever was about to happen. Supreme Chancellor Throckdan stood at the center of the platform, his crystalline exoskeleton reflecting the platform's lights in sharp, aggressive patterns. His forearms gestured emphatically as he spoke into a communication device, clearly trying to coordinate some kind of response to this unprecedented situation. Impossible, he snarled as he caught sight of Maya and Morgith. The dragon does not leave the trial chamber. The dragon does not spare the condemned. Perhaps, Morgith replied, his voice now audible to all present through both psychic projection and physical speech. You do not know the dragon as well as you believed. In 3,000 years of trials, no one had ever heard the dragon speak directly to the Council. He had been a silent executioner, a force of nature that simply eliminated whatever was fed to it. Maya felt the weight of hundreds of alien eyes upon her, but she kept her focus on the Supreme Chancellor. The trial is complete, she said clearly. I have faced the judgment of Morgith and been found worthy. According to your own laws, humanity is granted clemency. Throckdan's laugh was like the sound of breaking glass. Child, you understand nothing. The trial is not about worthiness. It is about data collection. Your species has provided valuable insights into the corruption of psychic potential, but your survival was never a possibility we planned for, gestured, and hidden weapon systems throughout the platform activated, their targeting systems locking onto both Maya and the dragon. Terminate the anomalies, he commanded. The weapons fired in perfect synchronization, unleashing enough destructive force to level a small city, but the energy beams never reached their targets. Instead, they struck a barrier of shimmering psychic force and scattered harmlessly in all directions. Morgith had not moved aggressively or threateningly. He had simply extended his consciousness around himself and Maya, creating a protective field that deflected the attack without retaliating. "You see?" Throckdon called out to the assembled representatives. "The weapon has been corrupted by the human influence. It protects rather than destroys, defends rather than judges. This proves the necessity of our research into psychic weaponization." But Maya could see that not all of the watching aliens were convinced. Some of the representatives looked disturbed by the Supreme Chancellor's casual admission that the trials had been experiments rather than justice. Others seemed frightened by the implications of what he was saying about psychic weaponization. "You're afraid," Maya called out, her young voice carrying clearly across the platform. "You're afraid that if beings like Morgith remember what it's like to choose compassion over control, your entire system of domination will collapse." "Silence!" Throckdon raised one of his arms, and Maya saw the glint of a personal weapon in his grasp. "You are nothing but a data point, an aberration to be corrected. Stand down, Supreme Chancellor." Maya turned to see a figure she didn't recognize, a tall, graceful being whose species she couldn't immediately identify. Their skin seemed to shift between different colors like oil on water, and their eyes held depths of intelligence and sadness. "Counselor Zarnine," Throckdon snarled, "you have no authority here." "I have the authority of 3,000 years of suppressed evidence," Zarnine replied calmly. "Evidence of what the Council has really been doing in places like this. Evidence that some of us have been gathering while waiting for the right moment to act." The counselor gestured, and holographic displays materialized around the platform. They showed recordings from dozens of different trials over the centuries, but these weren't the sanitized versions that had been presented to the galactic public. These showed the full scope of the Council's experiments, the systematic corruption of psychic beings, the development of technologies designed to weaponize consciousness itself. "The Gauntlet of Zorthak was never about justice," Zarnine announced to the assembled representatives. "It has been a research facility dedicated to the creation of psychic weapons. The Council has been planning to use beings like Morgeth to subjugate every free world in the galaxy." A roar of outrage rose from many of the watching aliens. Representatives of species who had believed they were serving a just cause suddenly found themselves confronted with evidence of a conspiracy that went back millennia. But Throckdon was not finished. "You fools," he spat. "Do you think justice and peace come from weakness? Do you think the galaxy can be held together through compassion and understanding? We maintain order through strength, through the knowledge that those who challenge the system will face consequences they cannot escape." "And what happens when that system turns on you?" Maya asked quietly. Her voice shouldn't have carried over the chaos, but somehow every being on the platform heard her clearly. "What happens when you become the ones judged unworthy?" Throckdon's weapon was now pointed directly at her. "Then we ensure that never happens by eliminating the sources of chaos and disorder. Sources like a disabled human child who chose compassion over power?" Morgeth's voice carried a new quality now, not the cosmic weight of eternal judgment, but something more immediate and present. "Tell me, Supreme Chancellor, what does that make you afraid of?" For a moment, the platform fell silent. Then, Throckdon squeezed the trigger of his weapon, sending a bolt of lethal energy directly toward Maya's heart. The bolt never reached her, not because Morgeth intercepted it, but because one of the Zephyrian guards, Jeklon, the young one who had seemed nervous during the transport, threw himself between the weapon and Maya, taking the fatal shot meant for her. As the young guard collapsed, his tentacles changing color in the pattern that indicated death among his species, something fundamental shifted in the crowd of watchers. The clinical detachment of bureaucratic procedure was shattered by the reality of unnecessary death. "Enough," said Counselor Zarnine, and their voice carried authority that even Throckdon couldn't ignore. "The evidence is clear, the crimes are documented, and the choice is before us. Will we continue to serve a system built on fear and exploitation, or will we choose something better?" Maya looked down at the dying guard who had sacrificed himself for her, and felt something crystallize in her heart. This was what the trial had really been about, not her worthiness or Morgoth's judgment, but the question of what happened when beings were given the choice between perpetuating cycles of violence or breaking them through acts of unexpected compassion. "The revolution begins now," she said quietly, and felt Morgoth's psychic presence amplifying her words so that every being on the platform could hear them clearly. "Not with weapons or conquest, but with the simple decision to refuse to let fear control us anymore." Now came the hardest part, convincing the galaxy that change was possible. The death of Guard Jeklin created a moment of absolute stillness on the observation platform. In that silence, Maya could hear the soft whisper of the alien's final breath, see the way his tentacles had curled protectively around the space where she sat. A being she had known for mere hours had chosen to sacrifice his life for hers, and that choice reverberated through the watching crowd like a stone dropped into still water. Supreme Chancellor Throckdan stared at his weapon as though it had betrayed him. He had intended to eliminate a problem, to maintain control through decisive action. Instead, he had created a martyr and revealed the true nature of his authority to hundreds of galactic representatives. "You see what your compassion accomplishes," he snarled at Maya, his crystalline features twisted with rage. "Now a good soldier is dead because you made him weak." Instead of anger or grief, she felt a deep calm settling over her. "He wasn't weak," she said quietly. "He was stronger than any of us realized. Strong enough to choose love over fear, even when it cost him everything." She maneuvered her wheelchair closer to Jeklon's body, ignoring the weapons still trained on her from various positions around the platform. Gently, she reached out and touched one of his cooling tentacles, her human hand looking small and fragile against his alien flesh. "What was his name?" she asked, looking up at the other Zephyrian guards. They exchanged glances, clearly uncertain how to respond. Finally, one of them stepped forward, Vextar, who had been so contemptuous during the transport ship journey. His 6 arms moved in a complex pattern that Maya's translator rendered as formal grief. "Jeklon Tikmar," he said, his voice carrying notes Maya had never heard before. He had just reached the age of choosing his life path. He chose service to the council because he believed it would let him protect others. Maya nodded, committing the name to memory. Then she looked up at the assembled representatives, her young voice carrying clearly across the platform. "Remember this name. Remember that he chose to protect instead of destroy, to serve love instead of fear. Remember that in the end, he was braver than all the weapons and fleets of the entire Galactic Council." Counselor Zarneen stepped forward, their color-shifting skin now displaying patterns that Maya's enhanced awareness somehow connected to Morgoth's ancient knowledge, recognized as deep respect and renewed determination. "The choice is before us," Zarneen announced to the crowd. "Descend a gift. With trust steady, we have seen the evidence of what our system has become. We have watched a child choose compassion over power and inspire others to sacrifice themselves for strangers. We have witnessed the transformation of our greatest weapon into our greatest teacher. The question now is simple. What do we do with this knowledge?" Throckdan raised his weapon again, this time pointing it at Counselor Zarneen. "We do what we have always done. We eliminate the sources of disorder and maintain the stability that has kept the galaxy at peace for millennia." But as he spoke, Maya became aware of something happening beyond the platform. Through Morgoth's enhanced senses, she could perceive ships moving in the space around Kethmorai, not just the council fleet that had brought the trial observers, but other vessels. Ships representing species that had been subjugated by the council, worlds that had been forced to submit to galactic authority through fear rather than consent. "They're not alone anymore," she whispered to Morgoth. The dragon's consciousness touched hers with warm amusement. "Did you think word of what was happening here would not spread? There are others throughout the galaxy who have been waiting for this moment, who have been preparing for the possibility that change might come. The platform's communication system suddenly activated, and a chorus of voices began speaking in dozens of different languages. The translation systems worked frantically to render them all into comprehensible speech, but the message was clear in every language: support for what was happening on the platform, declarations of independence from Council authority, demands for the release of other psychic beings imprisoned throughout the galaxy. Throckton spun around, trying to process the flood of communications. His forearms moved frantically as he attempted to activate override protocols to silence the rebellion before it could spread further. But Maya realized something that he apparently hadn't. The communications weren't coming through standard Council channels. They were being transmitted through the psychic network that connected Morgoth to other imprisoned beings like himself. "How many?" she asked the dragon silently. 17 that I can reach directly, but through them I can sense dozens more. The Council has been very busy over the centuries, creating weapons from those who once sought to heal. Morgoth's mental voice carried both sorrow and growing hope. They are all feeling the change in me, understanding that transformation is possible. Maya looked around the platform, seeing the chaos spreading among the Council representatives as they realized the scope of what they were facing. This wasn't just a single anomaly to be eliminated. It was a network activation that could unravel their entire system of control. "Counselor Zarnin," she called out, "how long have you been planning this?" The color-shifting alien's patterns shifted to display what Maya now recognized as wry humor. "Planning is perhaps too strong a word, but preparing for the possibility? Since the first time I witnessed a trial and realized that what we were calling justice was actually systematic torture." "Impossible," Throckdan snarled. "Security protocols would have detected any organized resistance. Only if that resistance used technology and communication methods you understood," Zarnin replied calmly. "But there are other ways to connect minds and hearts, ways that your surveillance systems never anticipated." Maya understood. The resistance hadn't been coordinated through encrypted messages or secret meetings. It had been built through simple acts of compassion and connection, through beings like Counselor Zarnin reaching out to others who were troubled by what they saw, offering understanding and hope rather than plans and weapons. It was the same kind of network that had allowed Jeklon to make his sacrifice. Not a military chain of command, but a web of empathy that connected beings who still believed in the possibility of something better. "The beauty of it," Maya said, speaking to both the platform and the psychic network that now connected her to Morgoth and through him to beings across the galaxy, "is that you can't fight it with weapons. You can't control it with fear. Because it's not based on anything you can take away." Throckdan's weapon swung toward her again, but this time he hesitated. Maya could see the calculation in his crystalline features. He was beginning to realize that killing her might not solve his problem. In fact, it might make things worse. "What do you want?" he demanded. Maya looked around the platform, at the representatives of dozens of species, at the guards and officials and observers who had come to witness what they thought would be a simple execution. She thought of Jeklon's sacrifice, of Morgoth's transformation, of the voices calling out across the galaxy in support of change. "I want you to remember what you were before you became afraid," she said simply. "I want you to remember that every being in this galaxy, including you, was once someone who hoped for something better than endless cycles of domination and submission." "Naive idealism," Throckdan spat. "Maybe. But it's an idealism that just inspired a total stranger to die for me. It's an idealism that helped a weapon of cosmic judgment choose to become a force for healing. It's an idealism that has created a network of resistance you never even knew existed." Maya met his gaze steadily. "What has your realism created?" For a moment, something flickered in the Supreme Chancellor's expression. Doubt, perhaps, or a memory of what he had once believed in. But then his features hardened again. "Order," he said firmly. "Stability. Peace through strength." Peace for whom? The question came not from Maya, but from one of the other council representatives. a being whose species Maya didn't recognize, with features like crystallized flame. My world has known your peace for 2 centuries. We have provided resources and soldiers and obedience, and in return, we have received the privilege of not being destroyed. That is the bargain, Throckdon replied. Submit to order and be protected from chaos. But what if there's a third option? Maya asked. What if instead of choosing between domination and submission, we choose cooperation? What if instead of maintaining peace through fear, we build it through understanding? The flame crystalline representative stepped forward. My people have legends of the time before the council, when different species worked together as equals. We thought those stories were myths. They were not myths, Morgoth said, his voice carrying the weight of first-hand knowledge. I was there. I remember when the galaxy was a place of voluntary cooperation, when differences were celebrated rather than feared. Those times were chaos, Throckdon insisted. Wars between species, conflicts over resources, the strong preying upon the weak. Yes, there were conflicts, Morgoth agreed. But there were also solutions that didn't require the systematic suppression of free will. There were compromises and alliances and growth through diversity. The Council eliminated the conflicts, but it also eliminated the growth. Maya could feel the mood on the platform shifting. The revelation that galactic history included alternatives to council rule was spreading through the crowd like ripples in a pond. Beings who had never imagined anything other than the current system were beginning to glimpse possibilities they had never considered. But she could also sense growing desperation from Throckdan and the core council loyalists. They were vastly outnumbered now, but they still controlled the immediate military assets around Kethmarai. Enough! Throckdan said finally. This ends now. He activated a communicator that connected him directly to the council fleet. All ships prepare for immediate sterilization of the platform. Eliminate all witnesses to this contamination. Maya felt ice forming in her stomach. She had expected resistance, but not genocide. But before the fleet could respond to Throckdan's order, something extraordinary happened. The communications network that Morgoth had been building through the psychic connections to other imprisoned beings suddenly expanded, reaching out to touch the minds of soldiers and ship crews throughout the fleet. Most of those minds resisted the contact, trained as they were to maintain mental barriers. But some were open beings like Jeklon, who had joined the Council's forces out of a desire to protect others, who had been troubled by orders that seemed to contradict their core values. Through those openings, Maya felt the network spread like wildfire through the fleet, not controlling anyone, not forcing compliance, but simply offering connection, understanding, the knowledge that they were not alone in their doubts. And across dozens of ships, beings began to make the same choice that Jeklon had made, to serve love instead of fear. The fourth part of the revolution had begun, and Maya realized that they were about to discover whether the galaxy was truly ready for the kind of change that could only come from within. The silence that followed Throckdan's sterilization order stretched for heartbeats that felt like eternities. Maya could sense the tension radiating from every being on the platform as they waited to see whether the fleet would follow through on the command to destroy them all. Through Morgoth's psychic network, she could feel the agonizing choices being made aboard ship after ship as crew members struggled between ingrained obedience and the growing awareness that they were being asked to commit genocide. Then, one by one, responses began coming through the communication systems. But they were not the confirmations that Throckdan expected. Command Ship Vorthek reporting. We cannot comply with that order, Supreme Chancellor. Destroyer Wing 7 declining to fire on civilian targets. Medical support vessel requesting clarification. Are we really being ordered to kill wounded beings? The voices multiplied, creating corrosive of refusal that grew stronger with each ship that declared its position. Maya watched Throckdan's crystalline features shift through expressions of disbelief, rage, and finally desperate calculation as he realized that his authority was crumbling in real time. "This is mutiny," he snarled into his communicator. "All officers refusing to comply will be court-martialed and executed." But the responses that came back carried a new quality. Not fear, but a kind of liberated determination that Maya recognized. It was the same tone she had heard in Jekyllon's voice when he stepped in front of that energy blast. Then we will face execution with honor, knowing we chose compassion over compliance. Our children will remember that we chose to protect the innocent. Better to die free than live as weapons of oppression. Through the psychic network, Maya could feel the moment when the crew members making these choices realized they were not alone. The connection that Morgoth had facilitated was allowing them to sense each other's presence across the fleet, to know that their individual acts of conscience were part of something larger and more powerful than any military command structure. Counselor Zarneen stepped forward, their color-shifting skin now displaying patterns of profound hope. Supreme Chancellor, perhaps it is time to acknowledge what is happening here. Your own forces are choosing a different path. The question is whether you will choose to walk that path with them or be left behind by history. Thruckden turned his weapon toward Zarnen, his rage now completely uncontrolled. But before he could fire, something unexpected happened. The platform's gravity systems, controlled by the gauntlet's biomechanical infrastructure, suddenly shifted, not violently or dangerously, but precisely enough to throw off his aim. The structure itself has chosen a side, Morgoth observed with gentle amusement. It has been a prison for so long it seems eager to become something else. The gauntlet wasn't just a building or a machine, it was a living entity that had been forced to serve purposes that went against its original nature. Like Morgoth himself, it had been corrupted from something meant to nurture and protect, but now, as the dragon's consciousness healed and transformed, the structure was following suit. Maya could see bioluminescent pathways lighting up throughout the platform, creating patterns that looked less like prison corridors and more like the neural networks of a vast awakening mind. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Through her connection to Morgoth, she could sense the gauntlet's awareness spreading beyond Kethmarai, reaching out to connect with other similar structures throughout the galaxy. 17 different prison laboratories where psychic beings had been held and corrupted, each one beginning to awaken to its true nature as the network of liberation expanded. But the most profound change was happening in the beings themselves. Maya could feel the moment when each imprisoned psychic entity made the same choice that Morgoth had made, to release their accumulated anger and despair, to remember their original purposes as healers and teachers and guides. The transformation was like watching a constellation of stars suddenly begin to shine with new light. Across the galaxy, weapons of judgment were choosing to become forces of compassion. "No," Throckdan said, his voice now carrying notes of genuine desperation. "This cannot happen. Without the framework of control, the galaxy will collapse into chaos. Species will war against each other. Worlds will burn. Civilization itself will crumble. Perhaps some of it will," Maya admitted, her honesty surprising even herself. "There will probably be conflicts, mistakes, times when we wonder if we made the right choice." She maneuvered her wheelchair closer to the Supreme Chancellor, ignoring the weapon he still held. "But the difference is that those will be our mistakes to make and learn from, not orders handed down from authorities who claim to know better than everyone else. You would condemn the galaxy to chaos for the sake of an ideal? I would trust the galaxy to grow into something better than what fear has made it," Maya replied. "The same way I trusted Morgoth to choose healing over judgment. The same way Jeklon trusted me to be worth dying for." Through the psychic network, she could feel the conversation being heard across the fleet, across the galaxy, by beings who were making their own choices about what kind of future they wanted to build. The response was not unanimous. There were those who agreed with Thruckdan, who feared change more than oppression, but there were also millions upon millions of voices rising in support of the possibility that things could be different. "The revolution you've been trying to prevent has already happened," Counselor Zarneen observed. "It happened the moment this child chose compassion over power." It spread the moment Morgoth remembered what it felt like to heal instead of harm. It multiplied every time someone on your own ships chose conscience over commands. It is unstoppable now, Morgoth added, because it is not based on force or control. It is based on the simple recognition that every conscious being has the right to choose their own path, to make their own mistakes, to grow in their own way. Maya watched Throckdan's expression cycle through rage, desperation, and finally something that might have been exhaustion. The weapon in his hand wavered, and she could see him beginning to realize that he was facing something he had no framework for understanding or defeating. "What happens to us?" he asked finally. "To those who built and maintained the system you seek to destroy?" It was the question Maya had been dreading, because she knew that how they answered it would determine whether their revolution truly was about compassion. "You make the same choice everyone else has to make," she said after a long moment. "You decide whether you want to be part of building something better or whether you want to cling to what you've always known. And if we choose to resist, if we attempt to maintain the old order by force..." Maya looked around the platform at the representatives of dozens of species, at the awakening consciousness of the gauntlet itself, at the vast network of liberation spreading across the galaxy. "Then you'll discover what it feels like to be outnumbered by hope instead of fear," she said simply. "And maybe, eventually, you'll realize that you were fighting against the parts of yourselves that you'd forgotten existed." Through the communication systems, new voices began to join the chorus, not just from the fleet around Kethmarai, but from worlds throughout the galaxy. Planetary governments were declaring independence from council authority. Oppressed species were announcing their intention to govern themselves. Trade networks were reorganizing themselves around cooperation rather than exploitation. But perhaps most importantly, Maya could sense something else through the psychic network, a quality she had only felt hints of before. It was the sound of laughter, of joy, of beings who were discovering that they were free to choose happiness. "Do you hear that?" she asked Morgoth. "The sound of a galaxy learning to sing again." The dragon replied with deep satisfaction. "It has been far too long since I heard such music." Throckdan's weapon finally lowered, though whether from acceptance or simple exhaustion Maya couldn't tell. Around the platform, the chaos of resistance was gradually giving way to the organized chaos of reconstruction. Beings who had been enemies moments before were beginning to talk to each other to explore the possibilities of what they might build together. "What about my people?" Maya asked suddenly, remembering the human colony on Kepler 442b, the fleet that was sent to destroy them. Counselor Zarnin's pattern shifted to display what Maya now recognized as gentle humor. "That fleet received new orders approximately 7 minutes ago. They are currently delivering medical supplies and offering to help establish the colony as an independent world." From whom did those orders come? From the new interim coalition that seems to be forming spontaneously among the species representatives here on the platform. Amazing what beings can accomplish when they start talking to each other instead of at each other. Maya felt tears forming in her eyes, not from sadness but from overwhelming gratitude. Her people were safe. More than that, they were free to become whatever they chose to be. "So what happens now?" she asked the assembled crowd. The answer came not from any single voice, but from the collective consciousness of the network itself. Thousands of beings across the galaxy speaking with one purpose, though each in their own words. "Now we learn," they said. "We make mistakes and fix them. We disagree and find compromises. We explore and create and grow. We become what we were always meant to be before we became afraid." "Now we discover," Morgoth added, "what the galaxy looks like when it is guided by love instead of ruled by fear." Maya smiled, feeling the warmth of the psychic network surrounding her like a blanket of starlight. She was still 13 years old, still disabled, still small and fragile in a universe of vast forces and cosmic powers. But she was no longer alone. None of them were. The revolution was complete, but the real work was just beginning. And for the first time in her life, Maya Chen looked toward the future with absolute confidence that whatever came next would be better than what had come before, because it would be built by beings who had chosen hope over fear, compassion over control, love over power. And that, she had learned, made all the difference in the galaxy. In the depths of space around Kethmarai, 17 ancient structures that had once been prisons began their transformation into something new. Schools, perhaps, or hospitals, or simple meeting places where beings from across the galaxy could come to remember what it felt like to choose kindness. The dragon's choice had become the galaxy's choice, and the universe would never be the same. Galactic aliens threw a crippled 1-3-old human girl to their deadliest dragon. They never expected what happened next. HFY Sci-Fi.